Dear students, as we discussed yesterday about the topic of miscarriage, today we are going to discuss about recurrent miscarriages under the domain of miscarriage. Yesterday we discussed about the spontaneous miscarriages, or they are also known as the sporadic miscarriage. Now, what do you mean by the word sporadic? The miscarriages, they are happening after one successful pregnancy. Then again, maybe two successful pregnancies happened, healthy, and they ended up with a healthy outcome, and again a miscarriage occurred. That is referred as sporadic or spontaneous miscarriage. On the other hand, if there are recurrent pregnancy losses, now you see difference. That is the sporadic or the spontaneous when the miscarriage is or a pregnancy reaching up to the term or a preterm, that is beyond the duration of miscarriage, or duration of miscarriage. But on the other hand, if there are three or more consecutive miscarriages, that is, the miscarriages happening in a row, then it is labeled as recurrent miscarriage. So, the miscarriages which are happening as recurrent pregnancy losses, it is also known previously as habitual abortion. Okay, but now we refer to as three or more consecutive miscarriages as recurrent pregnancy loss or recurrent miscarriage. So, what's the epidemiology? 1% of all women can suffer from this condition. As we discussed yesterday, the spontaneous miscarriage, the incidence was around 10 to 20% or 10 to 15% in all clinically recognized pregnancies. In all the pregnancies, the incidence is 10 to 15%. This was 1% of all women. This was 1% of all women. And this is around 10 to 15% of all clinically recognized pregnancies, as we discussed yesterday regarding the spontaneous or sporadic miscarriage. The incidence of two consecutive miscarriages is around 2%. The theoretical risk of three consecutive miscarriages can be around 0.3%. So, probable underlying problem leading to recurrent miscarriage is there. Whenever we name the word recurrent miscarriage, it means there is always some probable underlying cause or a recurrent cause which is manipulating or which is functioning under like in the background for the consecutive miscarriages to happen. The reason why we need to investigate further if the recurrent miscarriages happen. What do you think? Why we need to investigate further if the recurrent miscarriages are happen? Yes, the same thing, that there must be some underlying cause which is letting these miscarriages to happen. So we should be investigating the cause, and obviously if we are coming to know about the cause, we are going to treat that condition and we are going to help the lady with the miserable condition. So, what about the two consecutive miscarriages? According to the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, they defined as two consecutive miscarriages which can be considered as recurrent miscarriage as well. But we would follow the guidelines of Royal College of OBGs UK, and we are the definition what we would follow would be as three consecutive miscarriages. So, like, what would you say? if a lady comes to us and she's gravid 6, para 2 plus 3, what does it mean if she has two pregnancies which are beyond the duration of miscarriage, like about more than 24 weeks, and then she had three miscarriages consecutively in a row, she would be labeled as having recurrent miscarriage. Or maybe she had first three miscarriages followed by the two pregnancies beyond the duration of miscarriage. Or we can say she has first healthy pregnancy, then she had a miscarriage, again she had two pregnancies which ended up with the healthy babies with her, or preterm deliveries, and then again two miscarriages. Now would she be labeled as recurrent miscarriage? No. Now she would not be labeled as recurrent miscarriage, because the miscarriages are not being happened in a row. They should be consecutive miscarriage when we label them as recurrent miscarriage. So in our local practice, usually we take three consecutive miscarriages. And for these miscarriages, if a lady comes to us, what we need to know is an earlier investigation. Referral should be considered for special cases. The most common, or the most of the factors which we come along while evaluating about the recurrent miscarriages is that what we should be knowing about advanced maternal age. Advanced maternal age would I would not say directly would be an etiological factor, but it can be a risk factor. Can be a risk factor when we are considering recurrent miscarriages. Is a lady having a bad obstetric history before, ectopic IUD, and then again the recurrent miscarriages? So we should be our plan of management will definitely be affected when we are considering about her previous bad obstetric history. Was she had a history of previous infertility? And what is the patient request due to social reasons? These all we are going to discuss and evaluate while we are discussing a lady or evaluating a lady regarding her history for recurrent miscarriage. So, in about 40 to 50% of cases, the cause is idiopathic. Like we are not aware of the cause. The cause is there are the recurrent miscarriages are happening under idiopathic causes. The causes not known to us, and and especially the important thing is that where it is an idiopathic thing, then we are more assured, and we can give healthy vibes to the lady that she can have further in future healthy pregnancies, when in spite of a deep down investigation we are not able to find any cause. So the recurrent miscarriages can, when we are studying them, it would be easier if we divide them into first or second trimester losses. The first trimester losses can be grouped under the acronym of PACE2. So the cause can be, as we will discuss in detail, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCO, APS, antiphospholipid syndrome, chromosomal abnormalities, as we discussed in our previous lecture of miscarriages, endocrine disorders, untreated diabetes mellitus or thyroid disease, uterine abnormalities like submucous fibroid and subsubstate fibroid uterus. These we are going to discuss in detail in the later slides. So again, what would be the causes? Can be the causes polycystic ovarian syndrome. I would not like, it would not be in the case of a recurrent miscarriage, it cannot be labeled on the top of the list, but can be one of the main causes. And we will discuss why it can, what will be the biochemical changes which can lead to the recurrent pregnancy losses. APS, chromosomal abnormalities, endocrine disorders, and uterine abnormalities. So more specific with the second trimester losses. More specific with the second trimester losses, the acronym of CAP-duty, cervical incompetence. Cervical incompetence. What's a cervical incompetence? Cervical incompetence is that, you know, a pregnancy is healthy and safe inside the uterus and the maternal womb when there is a cervix is competent. When the cervix is competent. If a cervix is incompetent, so in the layman language, we can say like it's become loose, it's become patulous. Would it be able to hold the pregnancy inside? No. If it has become incompetent, definitely there can be risk of pregnancy loss. And what are the factors which can lead to cervical incompetence? Cervical incompetence can be due to previous surgeries on the cervix, like if there were previous dilatation of the cervix for any indication of gynecological cause, previous miscarriages which ended up in evacuation and curettage, like we discussed yesterday when we saw discussed the instruments for dilatation and evacuation, and we discussed and we saw the instruments of like Hager's dilator and manipulation inside the uterus, and different instruments are used, and the history of instrumentation inside the uterine cavity can be a cause for the cervical incompetence. In these cases, the ultrasound findings will be of a short cervix. Mostly, these should be of would be of a short cervix. Asherman syndrome. What is an Asherman syndrome? In which there are intrauterine synecdoche. What is a synecdoche? It can be adhesions. These are adhesions. So Asherman syndrome, it is also a result of a vigorous endometrial curettage. Yesterday we discussed about the curettage, endometrial curette. So if it is in the vigorous manner it is done, in which the basal endometrium layer is sloughed off, then there are uterine synecdoche developing, and in these cases there will be definitely a difficulty in conceiving, and if pregnancy happens even, then there is difficulty for the growth and development of the embryo inside the uterine cavity, and they can result in miscarriages. Next come in order is the bacterial vaginosis. So what's the bacterial vaginosis? Bacterial vaginosis is a lower genital tract infection. Bacterial vaginosis is a lower genital tract infection, and in this case, because of the infection, and if it happens to become an ascending one, entering from the lower genital tract, from the vagina to the cervix and into the uterine cavity. So at the level of the cervix, when it can release the inflammatory cytokines and the prostaglandins, which will mimic the action of the prostaglandins of the labor and can lead to cervical incompetence, being patulous, uterine activity, and ultimately miscarriage. So, therefore, the infections and the most important among them, the bacterial vaginosis, is an important cause of miscarriages. The other important cause of the second trimester miscarriage is uterine abnormality. It can be congenital, like bicarbonate, septate, subsubstate, hypoplasia, and myomas. Myomas are not the congenital ones. And another important cause is thrombophilias. So, why are the congenital uterine abnormalities like bicarbonate, septate, and subsubstate can be a cause for pregnancy loss? These are all the Mullerian duct malformations. We have learned about the Mullerian duct malformations when we had the lectures for puberty and primary amenorrhea. We will be seeing some more good slides for their pictures as well now. So these, in this case, what could be a probable cause for miscarriage? Yes, because they are. You can assume them as not in a direct way, but they can be assumed as sort of space occupying lesion, isn't it, inside the uterus, and they would not give an enough space for the healthy implantation and growth of the developing pregnancy. So it will can end up in a miscarriage. Myomas, as we will see in the further slides, can also prevent the implantation. especially the submucous and subendometrial one. Thrombophilias, why they can be a cause for miscarriages? In the thrombophilias, there are the risk of microthrombi in the body as well as in the placental circulation in case of pregnancy. So these thrombophilias, when they would happen to have microthrombi in the placental circulation, they can lead to impairment of the circulation as well as oxygenation of the developing embryo, which can end up in miscarriages or miscarriages and can be a cause of, because thrombophilias are mostly autoimmune, they can lead to recurrent miscarriages. So other important causes can be SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus. In this case also, because the main features in SLE are thrombophilias plus hypertension plus autoimmune disorders, they can all contribute to the development of miscarriage. Hyperprolactinemia is not a much known cause, but can lead to as anovulation, unhealthy pregnancies, and later miscarriages. So, what about the polycystic ovarian syndrome? I think you know much better about it in your previous lectures of secondary amenorrhea, but just we will do a quick revision. The criteria for diagnosis is presence of at least two of the following three criteria: polycystic ovaries more than or equal to 12 follicles in each ovary, of each of less than 10 mm in diameter, and or ovarian volume more than 10 centimeter cube, like the ovarian stroma is more. So it can have the this is the ultrasound picture, and on the clinical side the patient can present to you with oligomenorrhea and anovulation, and there are clinical or biochemical features of hyperandrogenism. Clinical is when it's obvious, the hyperandrogenism, the hirsutism is obvious, and biochemical factor is when on the laboratory investigation serum testosterone level comes to be raised. So in this case, as the biochemical factor, an important biochemical factor is increased LH-FSH ratio. These can also affect the development or the further growth of a healthy pregnancy, and then can lead to miscarriage. The next important reason is antiphospholipid syndrome. And my dear students, this clinical entity, we most of the times, many times, and it is a common thing, we come across these patients which have APS and they have this problem. Even we would say to conceive, they have a problem. They would present with infertility, and if they conceive, then they can have the problems of recurrent miscarriage, preterm labor, hypertensive crisis, which can all lead to the development of crucial states in the pregnancy. So antiphospholipid is one of the recognized and one of the predicted situation in which the miscarriages can happen, and an important cause of recurrent miscarriages. So most important, but the good thing is that it is a treatable cause, but not in all cases. Not in all cases, maybe in spite of doing a vigorous treatment, in spite of having a closed workup, uh, even when the pregnancy state arrives, if the patient conceives, because it is an autoimmune disease, so the autoimmune factors come into play, and in spite of our medication and all the preventive measures taken, the lady can still happen to have been ended up in recurrent miscarriage. So, as diagnosed by the classification, there should be at least one clinical criteria and the one laboratory criteria. So, in the clinical thing, what we see is thrombosis. One or more documented episodes of arterial, venous, or small vessels thrombosis. In the laboratory investigation, anticardiolipin antibodies are at a higher level of IgG or IgM, isotype in medium or high titers, more than 40 international units or more than 99th percentile. For the pregnancy morbidity, there is one or more unexplained fetal death before. Like if a lady comes to you and she has one or two miscarriages, we would like to inquire her about the history of antiphospholipid syndrome. And while inquiring about the history, we should ask these directed questions. Either you had an arterial or venous an episode of thrombosis, either what was the previous outcome of your pregnancy, was it an fetal death of more than 10 weeks, was it a premature birth, did you have hypertension in your pregnancy. So all these are the predictors for antiphospholipid syndrome. So therefore I want to emphasize you that follow these criteria as part of your clinical history taking. As part of your clinical history taking, you can ask these leading questions to the lady to dig out regarding the status of APLS. So important thing is one unexplained fetal death of more than 10 weeks but morphological normal fetus. Why this condition? Morphological normal fetus. Because if there is a congenital anomaly, then the chromosomal part of the abnormality comes more into play. But if it is a normal fetus, normally formed fetus, then we can more have risk of APLS. So if the lupus anticoagulant is detected, then we are also having a clue for APLS. If there is one or more premature birth of less than 34 weeks of gestation, with severe preeclampsia or placental insufficiency, IgGR, and morphological normal fetus, like there is no chromosomal anomaly coming into play, or there are anti-beta 2 glycoproteins more than 99th percentile, or there are three or more unexplained consecutive spontaneous miscarriages less than 10 weeks. Here we don't have to write about the morphological normal or no, because they are less than 10 weeks. So on two or more occasions at least 12 weeks apart, the values of these on the laboratory part, on the lab investigation, anticardiolipin and lupus anticoagulant and anti-beta 2 glycoprotein, if they are coming to be positive on two or more occasions at least, in some books it's 6 weeks apart, then we are more concerned to have the diagnosis of APLS. So the other important reason can be chromosomal abnormalities, karyotyping. As we discussed in our previous lecture, they are more so common in the case of spontaneous or sporadic miscarriage, but can be also a major cause in cases of recurrent miscarriages. Okay. You see, and one of the most important among the chromosomal abnormalities is the Bellness translocations. Is the Bellness translocations like reciprocal or Robertsonian. See, this is the chromosome A, this is chromosome B. How you see, this is the translocations are happening, balanced translocations. You can see, this is how. This again you see, these are the chromosomal abnormalities. Here you see, can it be reflected? Chromosome number 2 is being 22 is being affected. Okay, so these are the one of the important causes. Now coming to the endocrine factors. Usually diabetes mellitus or thyroid diseases are involved in cases of recurrent miscarriages. But well controlled diabetes mellitus and treated thyroid dysfunction are not the risk factors for recurrent miscarriages. You know, diabetes mellitus, if uncontrolled, can at submolecular level, even at the time of conception or even in the preconception period, have deleterious effect for a lady. So an optimum control of diabetes is very important for initiation of a healthy pregnancy as well as its um development, and thus ending having a healthy outcome. Same is the case with the thyroid disease. Now coming on to the uterine abnormalities. What is this? This is your normal uterus. You can see a uterine cavity, cervix, and vagina. This is a bicornuate uterus. You can see two cornua. So, what do you think? If it's a bicornuate uterus, not in all cases, there is an assumption if, like, Coincidentally, a lady has a recurrent miscarriages and she is found to have a bicoordinate uterus as well. We can have an assumption that a bicoordinate uterus maybe can impair a proper implantation and further development of the pregnancy. But not in all cases. There are many cases with bicoordinate uterus when we are having healthy pregnancies till term. And then a risk factor can arise in those cases of a malpresentation. Okay, so of like a breach or a transfer slide. So that is another factor. But if a lady has recurrent miscarriage and no other on investigation, no other predisposing factor is found, and she has a bicoordinate uterus, then we can say that bicoordinate uterus can be a cause for this. These are all the parts of the Mullerian duct anomalies. This is uterus didelphys. The horn is completely, there are two separate horns, completely divided, but the vagina is the single opening. These are further much more variants of the uterine anomalies. You can see uterus subseptis unicollis, like what is collis? Vaginal opening. It is one, it is single. Here you can see it is septus, but with duplex. The vaginal opening is as well duplex. Here you can see double vagina. This is the vaginal opening and this is the vaginal opening. There are two uterine cavities with the uterine horns with a double vagina. So these are the different variants. These are the different variants. Here you can also see uterus didelphys with double vagina. Septus is present. Only uterus unicornus is present. There is another horn, but with unconnected rudimentary horn. Okay, so this can be also one of the variant. So these can be the probable causes for recurrent miscarriages. Now coming to the uterine fibroids, myomas. What is a myoma? It is a benign tumor of the uterus, and the word comes from myoma. What is myoma? It is coming from what is the muscle layer of the uterus known as myometrium. So it means a tumor of the myometrium would be known as myoma or fibroid. Depending upon the location of fibroid or myoma, they can be a cause for recurrent miscarriage. Like you see, if we come from inside to outside, this is a sub, because the inner layer is mucosa, then comes submucosa, the muscle, and then serosa, as you know from your histology. So, a submucosal fibroid, you see, then here would be a intramural fibroid. These are intramural, inside the myometrium. A submucosal fibroid, then a myometrial fibroid can be there, and a subserosal, which is abetting the serosa, and a pedunculated subserosal fibroid can be there also. So you can see this is a pedunculated submucosal fibroid also. So most commonly, or which seem to be affecting with the pregnancy development and implantation and growth. What do you think? So which of the fibroid can affect it? Yes, most probably the submucosal one, because it is abetting inside the endometrial cavity. It is abetting inside the endometrial cavity and thus can effect with the implantation, development, and growth. Similarly, pedunculated submucosal fibroid can also affect, but less likely. The as you can see mechanically, the submucosal fibroid can be more of the factor which can be involved in cases of the failure of the uh, failure for the pregnancy to embed and leading to miscarriage. So, therefore, the submucosal fibroids can be a cause. And if the submucosal fibroid happens to be around the ostia of the tube, these will continue as the fallopian tubes. If it happens to be here, like, what do you think will happen? Yes, there will be even the cases of infertility. The patient will be present, can present to us with infertility. And these can be confirmed by hysterosalpingography. When a dye is introduced inside the uterine cavity and the filling defects can give us a clue or give us a clue about the position of the fibroids as well and their effects. Now, coming up to the cervical incompetence. As I've told you before, when the instrumentation is done and the cervicus is no more competent, then one can be there. Diagnosis is clinical, usually based on the history. The miscarriages in case of cervical incompetence usually happen in cases of second trimester miscarriages. Subsequent miscarriages are usually earlier. The thing is, if the cervical incompetence we are suspecting, first one of the miscarriage happened in the second trimester, she again comes in the next pregnancy with the sign and symptoms of pain and bleeding, and you are suspecting that she might abort, and then if you take a retrospective history, the miscarriages are happening at the earlier gestation than the previous one. In these cases, we can be preceded by spontaneous rupture of membranes. Spontaneous rupture of membrane. Bulging membranes of the cervix prior to the onset of labor, as was in the case of inevitable miscarriage. There are bulging membrane through the cervix prior to the onset of labor. We know that the labor is the process which initiates the cervical dilatation, isn't it? The prostaglandins are released and they initiate the process of labor. But if the cervix is incompetent, it does no more need any prostaglandins, and it will dilate prior to the onset of labor, showing its incompetence. So there will be bulging of membranes through the cervix prior to the onset of labor. The loss is mostly in these cases painless and progressive cervical dilatation, because the pain is coming and feeling of the pain in the labor is due to prostaglandin. Here, no such mechanism is working, and we assume that cervical incompetence is a sort of a mechanical dysfunction. It is a sort of a mechanical dysfunction. Therefore, the bleeding is painless and there is progressive cervical dilatation. Fetus is alive during the miscarriage, and there is a previous history of cervical surgery or cone biopsy, and there is no satisfactory objective test, but cervical length, if it is less than 3 centimeter in the earlier gestation, it can give us a prediction about the cervical incompetence. So again, we would like to revise that for cervical incompetence, if we are suspecting, then the lady can give us a history of previous second trimester miscarriages. Subsequent miscarriages are usually earlier, preceded by spontaneous rupture of membranes, bulging membranes of the cervix prior to the onset of labor, painless and progressive cervical dilatation, and fetus is alive sometimes or may or not. Now we come to the next our cause, which is not so common, but it is an important cause: Asherman syndrome. I think you are all of you are aware when you have learned about this in the chapter of secondary amenorrhea. Due to the due to the vigorous and overzealous curettage of the uterine cavity, we can end up with a condition of Asherman syndrome. And if the pregnancy or if there is, especially in the cases of PPH, postpartum hemorrhage, excessive curettage is done, or if there are repeated miscarriages, repeated diagnostic DNCs are done, or evacuations are done, then we can have these problem. So these are the intrauterine synecdoche. These are the intrauterine synecdoche which we can observe in the hysteroscope. Now coming to one of the other most important causes and one of the common causes. So presence of bacterial vaginosis in the first trimester. It is reported as a risk factor for second trimester miscarriage or preterm delivery. A randomized controlled trial reported that treatment of bacterial vaginosis early in the second trimester with oral clindamycin significantly reduces the incidence of second trimester miscarriage and preterm birth in general population. So, because bacterial vaginosis is a risk factor for second trimester miscarriage as well as preterm, so if an optimum management is carried out, then we can have a lesser risk of this condition. So, what's an important aspect for management? The emotional aspect should always be kept in mind. A loss of pregnancy can be devastating, traumatic experience, especially in cases of recurrent losses, and especially when a patient has or a lady has no previous alive issue, no healthy children before, and she is continuously ending up in miscarriage, and three miscarriages happen. What do you think of her and her family? There is a loss of pregnancy. It can be a devastating traumatic experience. It can lead to anxiety, stress, and depression. Instead of getting sympathy and support, often she is made to feel that somehow it's her fault. So, under intense pressure to provide a child for the family may even lead to family problems and divorce. So, sensitivity is required in assessing and counseling the couples. This is very important. And approach is with sympathy and understanding, and do not blame or scold and feel her at fault. And another important thing, which is the most reassuring sign, that even after three recurrent miscarriages, still the chances of a healthy outcome for a pregnancy is around 80%. This is very important and reassuring sign and reassuring feature for a lady who had three recurrent miscarriages. And when you assure her that still you have a good 80% chance of having or ending up in a healthy pregnancy, it will give her a good emotional support for her management further. So, how we should be approaching a lady with this condition? She should be referred to the hospital specialist for further management. Preliminary management that can be done in the district and hospital clinics. History, as we have told you, how you will approach with the history. What was the previous? The important thing to consider in her history would be what was the previous duration of pregnancy when she miscarried, at what duration of gestation. If it happens to be more of the first trimester miscarriages, we think more of the chromosomal abnormalities. And similarly, if it comes more into the second trimester, then the causes, just as we have discussed before, come in our mind. What were the comorbid conditions around it? Was there any vaginal discharge, vaginal infections at that time? Was she having any cervical manipulation, cervical procedures done? Was there previous painless bleedings, like in case of cervical incompetence? Was she had repeated evacuation and curettage or surgically manipulation inside the uterine cavity? So all these, is she has a history of diabetes mellitus or a thyroid disease. Is she having any sign and symptoms for it? You're going to ask about those sign and symptoms as you ask for thyroid disease and diabetes mellitus. Is she a case of polycystic ovarian syndrome? So all these factors should be considered while taking her history. Examination, your examination will definitely also correspond to the points you have elicited in her history. Like if she says, suppose, gives you a history regarding polycystic ovarian syndrome, you are going to examine the lady on those sides. Is she having a hirsutism? What about the weight gain? What about the central obesity? So these are the factors you are going to consider. If she gives you about the history about diabetes mellitus, her complete medical evaluation is mandatory, and keeping the levels into the normal range. So let's see in the history what we are going to ask. Complete obstetric history, year of miscarriage, gestation at which that happened, how was the pregnancy confirmed, uh, urine pregnancy test or by ultrasound, assumed she was pregnant as she missed the periods. Sometimes it does happen. They label themselves as they have miscarried because they label themselves that they got pregnant. But the thing is to confirm, was her pregnancy was confirmed or not. This is a very important factor. They say yes, you missed periods for 2 months. I was pregnant and then I had a miscarriage. So it's not the thing. The important thing is confirmation. Whether she had a spontaneous miscarriage or was it followed by DNC or termination? Was the embryo live at the time of miscarriage? And what were the other complications she suffered from? If second trimester losses, ask for the features of cervical incompetence. And as I have told you, what are the features of cervical incompetence? Were they painless bleeding? Was it followed by first um, bleeding and then pain, or was the pain earlier and then bleeding? If the bleeding is earlier or the rupture of membrane is earlier and then followed by pain, it points more towards cervical incompetence. Again, I would like to revise, if there is a painless bleeding, like bleeding and rupture of membranes or passage of the products of conception and then followed by pain, it is more in the favor of cervical incompetence. But if the pain appears earlier and then followed by bleeding, then we go more in the favor of other causes of miscarriage. So, any surgical history, especially uterine instrumentation, as I've told you, cervical surgery, any medical illnesses, and one important thing, consanguinity. What is consanguinity? Cousin marriage. And when there is consanguinity, we are also considering more towards the chromosomal abnormalities. As among the cousins, especially in the first cousins, in the consanguineous marriages, there is more risk of chromosomal anomalies. So, therefore, as I discussed yesterday also with you, the products of conception should always be sent for histopathology. Should always be sent for histopathology as well as for karyotyping and analysis, especially in cases of consanguineous marriages and recurrent miscarriages, so that if there is any karyotyping problems with the chromosomal or translocations, that can be assessed. So this is very important that we focus on the history to come up with the cause of recurrent miscarriages. You know, a thorough history in cases of recurrent miscarriages will lead you to a very optimum and balanced approach in these cases to help out these ladies and just to dig out the cause and help out them accordingly. Um, Suppose a lady in your medical evaluation, in your history and evaluation, you come up with a history of diabetes mellitus, uh, and at that time also when you evaluate her medically, her blood sugar levels are deranged, it's an uncontrolled diabetes mellitus. So in these cases, an optimum control will definitely have to help her a healthy pregnancy and healthy outcomes as well. Similarly, in case of antiphospholipid syndrome, in our multidisciplinary approach is a key factor to help her. We had a patient like this with us. She was a known case of APLS. She was under the care of medical department, and when she got pregnant for the first time, she had at that time a preterm delivery with hypertensive crisis, with placental abruption, and baby was delivered as IUD. So these all features, when inquiring upon the history, uh, led us to the diagnosis of APLS. And you know, in her next pregnancy, from the very beginning, when we had a multidisciplinary approach with the medical professional and with the obstetricians, we tried to give her an optimum care, and she had a term delivery. In between the whole scenario of her pregnancy, the whole duration, she had multiple bouts of hypertension, of surges of her APLS condition, when her blood pressure was many of the times it became uncontrolled. Many of the times she had severe flushes, and she suffered from this condition during that time of her when the fetal develop for the fetal and maternal condition was being assessed, was being monitored. During the ultrasound scanning, most of the time, many of the times, we found that the baby or the fetus was lagging behind in the growth as well. But all these conditions, with our multidisciplinary approach, were helped to much extent, and she had a healthy pregnancy. So, therefore, your questioning and inquiring regarding the previous history of previous pregnancy and the medical comorbid conditions is very important. Similarly, also in the case of, as we discussed previously, about the uterine fibroids. And this condition, clinically, I would also like to discuss with you, especially in case of uterine fibroids. As you can see, Mm, I showed you the slide about this. This was the one. Suppose if in a recognized case where there are all other comorbidities are ruled out, and suppose she had this submucous fibroid. So in this lady, how we can help her? Like we can do a myomectomy for her. If it is a smaller one, a hysteroscopic removal of this submucous fibroid can be done, which can further help her to have the next pregnancy with a healthy implantation and growth, isn't it? So these are the multiple small things in each and every case where your clinical approach can help the lady to have further, after even after three recurrent miscarriages, to have a healthy pregnancy. So the fibroids which are embedding inside the endometrial cavity may be interfering with implantation and growth. These can be removed and by hysteroscopically even, and the lady can be helped out. Similarly, in the case of uterine anomalies, if it is a separate uterus, it can also be removed hysteroscopically and helped out. But as I have told you, not in all cases that a subtate uterus or a bicoronate uterus is a cause for recurrent miscarriages. As I told you before, we have seen healthy pregnancies reaching till term when we did, suppose the patient was not also aware about her condition, and we did cesarean sections for malpresentation, and at the time of surgery, we found out the uterus was bicoronate. So this is another condition. So always you can counsel a lady, even if she has known about her condition while investigation of the recurrent miscarriages, that she has a bicarbonate uterus, and she blames this thing on herself, that this condition or this anatomical problem inside me may be a cause for a miscarriage. You can counsel her for the other um, good prospects, that many of the ladies with the bicarbonate uterus are reaching to the term as well. So it's not mandatory, it's not always the case that a bicarbonate uterus would always end up in a miscarriage. So therefore your clinical approach and counseling is very important. Like definitely if it is a big defect in the Mullerian duct agenesis or dysgenesis, like you can say, it can be a cause for with of a multiseptate uterus, or where is a complete partition inside the uterine cavity. They can definitely be a cause where a lady is likely to have a miscarriage. But milder forms, always remember, the milder forms of uterine anomalies or Mullerian duct dysgenesis are not a confirmatory cause for recurrent miscarriages or for the miscarriage. As I've told you before, that many of the ladies with bicarbonate uterus end up in healthy term pregnancies which reach till the term, and they have a healthy outcome. So therefore the clinical approach in all these cases and your counseling is very important. Similarly, in cases of PCO, and as you have discussed this in your previous lectures also, that for polycystic ovarian syndrome also, to have her disease controlled before she embark upon pregnancy is very important. Um, and the good thing about the polycystic ovarian syndrome is that only a 5% of the current weight reduction of that lady can help her to relieve of her condition, and relief of her condition, as well as to have a good prospects regarding fertility and further um, healthy outcomes in the early pregnancy as well as in the later part of pregnancy. As well, also you can counsel them to have an optimum controlled blood sugar levels in their later life, because in now the modern era we consider PCO not a disease but a syndrome, and a syndrome leading ultimately to diabetes, overt diabetes mellitus in the later years of a lady. So this important counseling regarding the condition would certainly help the ladies to have an important and beneficial help regarding their fertility status as well as the continuation of pregnancy. So hope you had a good by this time you have a good background knowledge in your mind regarding the recurrent miscarriages, and inshallah hope to be with you in the next lecture. Take care and stay blessed. Thank you.